Hello and welcome to the Curiosity and Consciousness podcast. The intention of this podcast is to open your mind, get curious about yourself and connect to the power you hold within. I am your host, Karen Maloney, an inside-out coach, helping you to believe in yourself and manifest your desires. Check out the podcast, available on all platforms, and go to my website, www.karenmaloney.com for all info. Happy Thursday, everybody. It's me, Karen Maloney, and I'm back with another wonderful guest. And this week, Kay Allison is joining me. And this week's conversation is all about going alcohol free. And Kay was a senior vice president at a global ad agency and a single mom as her drinking escalated to the point that she went alcohol free. She has helped hundreds of women stop the drinking spiral and live wildly successful and satisfying lives substance-free using her Juicy AF program. AF standing for alcohol free. Kay is an executive coach, a clairvoyant and a minister, and she's been an adjunct professor at Northwestern University. She's an author of 2 books, including Juicy AF, Stop the Drinking Spiral, Unleash Your Future, which will be published January 2023. A year after going alcohol-free, she launched her first company, the Energy Infuser, an agency that helped Fortune 200 companies. Together, those clients generated $2 billion in annual revenue. She went on to create the Energy Annex, a modern-day focus group facility that won World's Best Facility 17 years running. She co-founded Farm&amp Snacks, a natural food company, and sold it 4 years later. She lives in a pine forest, meditates by a waterfall every morning, and loves her family. I loved connecting with Kay and having this conversation about her journey to going alcohol free. She shares a little bit on her background and how she came to the point of having crossed a moral line that she decided to go alcohol free. She shares lots of tips for people if they wish to go alcohol free, and especially tips and the importance of dealing with those urges and learning to calm the nervous system to prevent you going back or picking up that drink. She also talks about how rules don't work when it comes to going alcohol free. It's better to make the decision once and then deal with the urge. And she also shares 5 spiritual laws that help people to move through addiction. But not only addiction, I think there are 5 spiritual laws for life. So really interesting conversation. Again, lots of takeaways from it. And if you want to find out more on Kay's work, you can go to her website, which is juicyaf.life. So that is www.juicyaf.life. On her website as well, she has a free Stop the Drinking Spiral challenge and a quiz that may be beneficial to you. So check those out. But as always, you can go to my website, karenmaloney.com, and click the podcast section, and I will have all links there. Enjoy. Welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. It's me, Karen Maloney, and joining me this week I have Kay Allison. First of all, Kay, thank you for joining and sharing with us today.
I am so excited to be here, Karen. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation as well. And I'm sure it may be beneficial for a lot of people, and maybe it could be also very triggering for a lot of people as well. And it's about going alcohol free, and you've gone alcohol free, and you're the founder of Juicy AF, which is alcohol free. And, we're going to delve into this topic as well. But maybe if you just share a little bit on your background first and kind of what brought you to this point.
So in 1999, I was a senior vice president of a global ad agency. I lived in a fancy part of Chicago. I drove a late model German car. I had custody of 2 kids that were going to private school, and I was drinking myself to death. I kept crossing moral line after moral line, and then I hit the last one that was unacceptable, and I knew that I was done. So I went alcohol free. I haven't had a drink since August 9th of 1999. And since then, I've started three successful companies. In the first 5 years, I started two businesses. I married the love of my life, adopted a child, wrote a book, bought a building, traveled around the world. My income, which was good as a corporate employee, multiplied by a factor of six in 5 years. And all the energy that I was spinning to impress you or to make you think that everything was okay in my world, and the energy I was expending to just get back to normal, all of a sudden, when I cut that line to the anchor of alcohol, all of that energy was free to just really create this big, magnificent life. And today, I have put together what I've been doing for the last 23 years and the way that I've helped individual women in the hundreds now over that same period of time and made it available to more women.
That's amazing. I love that. And that's, yes, incredible. And congratulations for your anniversary again recently at the start of this month. And when you mentioned that the over drinking and crossing many moral line after moral line, what did that mean for you? Just to help maybe people get a sense of maybe what that might look like.
All right, so I'm going to talk about two different things. First, I want to talk about how my body and a lot of women's bodies react abnormally to alcohol. So, what that means, there are three dimensions of it. First, when I start drinking, that first sip of wine, there are times when I have this overwhelming urge for more that just blots out any ideas I had about stopping at two or, alternating wine and water. It becomes overwhelming. It's kind of like being under a spell, like Sleeping Beauty being drawn inexorably to touching that spindle on the spinning wheel. That's what it feels like. It's kind of like being possessed. It's a very strange feeling. So once I start, there are times when I can't stop. And the second abnormal reaction is once I wake up and I'm like, I'm never doing that again, I inevitably ask myself eventually, how could I have done that yet again? Once I stop, I always start again. So once I start, I can't stop. Once I stop, I always start. And then the third dimension is I spin mentally, like my thoughts just spin and spin and spin. And it's anxiety, it's remorse, it's shame. And that agitation can only be relieved by the first drink. And so it's those three abnormal reactions that make drinking a problem for someone. The moral line issue had a lot to do with in that state when I had started drinking and was possessed by that overwhelming craving for more. I I did all kinds of crazy things, Karen. I slept with inappropriate men. I remember hitchhiking home in Chicago after being at a club, and these police picked me up and drove me home. I mean, the crazy, crazy stuff I did. I fell down on a dance floor with a client. I mean, it's like, who does
Yeah.
these things? Oh, I
Yeah.
guess I did, you know?
Yeah.
And I developed an eating disorder. But the line that I crossed that was unacceptable had to do with my kids, who were at the time, I think, 9 and 16 years old. And they had never really seen me drunk, but there was one night where I was so drunk that they had to undress me and put me in bed. And I was done,
Yeah.
I was done.
Yeah. It's It's unfortunate and amazing sometimes how we have to hit a real, not just a bottom, but a real rock bottom to finally get that spark or make that decision to do something different and to stick with it. And I think that's a big part as well, actually committing to what you said you were going
Mm.
to do. And because alcohol is so part of our society and culturally, and especially in corporate jobs, the social scene is massive as well. So, how do you help people to commit and then to eliminate the temptation?
Well, first, I want to say that going alcohol free is the gift that we don't want to give ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, and what I see a lot of women do is to make up rules about how they're going to minimize the consequences of their drinking. We'll make up rules about, I'm never going to drink the hard stuff, only wine and beer. Or we'll say, I'm only going to drink clear liquor, not scotch and whiskey. Or we'll say, I'm only going to drink on Saturday nights or when I'm out of town or whatever. We make up these rules. But here's why that doesn't work. It doesn't work for two reasons. Number one, remember what I said about this biological abnormal reaction of
Mhm.
once you start, you can't stop. Well, de facto, then, once I start, there is going to be a time when I'm not going to be able to stop. And so my rule isn't going to work. Even though it might work sometimes, there's going to come a time when it doesn't work. And the second thing is, it has to do with what I call our tired deciders. So there's research that shows that we make 30,000 to 35,000 decisions every day. From should I hit the snooze one more time to what am I going to have for lunch to whatever. So that's a lot of decisions. And by the time we get overwhelmed and tired and exhausted, our deciders are tired, and a tired decider does not make good decisions. I mean, think about how on Monday mornings, you're eating poached eggs and vegetables, and by Friday night, you're having pizza and beer. Like our deciders get tired. And because of that, it is actually easier to make a 100% commitment to going completely alcohol free because you make a decision once and your decider doesn't have to go back and forth in that dilemma of should I or shouldn't I? Is this the exception or is it not? I mean, it just is much easier to just flip the switch and be completely done. So that's number one. How to, not start again? Well, that is a whole different kettle of fish. There are two phases of this. The first phase is actually getting over the hump of resettling your nervous system from needing that drink. Our bodies are amazing through the process of homeostasis, right? Which tries to keep us in a zone where we survive. Our bodies adjust to our drinking. So if you drink a lot and you drink frequently, your body readjusts its baseline level so that when you drink, you don't get so relaxed that your heart stops beating and you forget to breathe. And so the more you drink, the more frequently you drink, your baseline is going to be more anxious. So at first, the emphasis is really about finding other ways to regulate our nervous systems, right? To calm ourselves down, to stop that spinning agitation. And those can be things, well, I have five M's, So the first is if the cravings are really bad, there is medication that helps take cravings away or helps minimize them. So you can ask a healthcare provider about that. So that's medicate. The second is you can masticate or eat. A lot of people find that sugar is really helpful at the very beginning because alcohol is so rich with sugar. So not only are you quitting alcohol, you're also quitting sugar at the same time. So a Snickers bar is not a bad thing at the beginning. You can meditate, right? So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Um, you can move, right? Moving your body. And I'm not talking 60 minutes of heavy weightlifting in a gym. You can walk briskly for 15 minutes and it can change your mind. And then my fifth M, which is the best, is you can masturbate, right? Have an orgasm. And it totally changes your nervous system. So those are my five M's as an immediate way to take the edge off.
They're great. I love that. And, as you say as well, especially in the beginning, to take that edge off as a tool and an aid to help you through that initial urge and surge. But how do you help people as well so they don't end up substituting one addiction for another?
Well, you have to be really, especially with the sugar or the sex part, you really have to be careful with that. When I first stopped drinking, my eating disorder flared and was really bad for maybe 6 months. What I find is that in order to be addiction free, it really requires changing your mind. And what I mean by that is changing your environment, changing your behaviors. And this is where meditation and a spiritual practice really is the answer. So, number one, changing your environment. And this means your physical environment, right? Pouring out the booze, getting rid of the wine glasses, that kind of stuff. Also at work, right? The second thing is a change in your routines. Drive to work a different way if you stop at a liquor store all the time. And the third is your social environment, right? So on the socials, start following accounts using the hashtag sober curious or alcohol free or recovery posse. Like these are some of the most popular ones. There's a subreddit called Quit Drinking that has 350,000 people on it. I mean, Peloton Sober Squad. We're out there. You can find support in a variety of ways.
Yeah, no, that's great as well. And when you went cold turkey in 99, what tools and supports really helped you as well? Or did you join any groups or connect with anyone else to help you through that? Or you had just come to that point within yourself that you were just ready to make the changes mentally, emotionally, physically? Or were there things that really helped you?
The first thing I want to say, Karen, about this is going cold turkey can be really dangerous. And if you've been drinking heavily and frequently, I would really suggest that you do so with some medical support. I've seen people, have seizures and really have a hard time. So I do want to put that disclaimer in here early on. I actually joined one of the most famous groups and programs to address sobriety. And what I found, the two things that were the most helpful about that, number one, it was the camaraderie and connection with other human beings. I had a girlfriend that got sober around the same time I did, that I met through that program, and we did everything together. We went to sober dances and we went out to dinner with a bunch of people who were newly alcohol free, and we'd go bowling and out for ice cream and all these dorky things that I swore I would never do, and had a great time. So that was really the first piece. And the second element that was really powerful for me was this insistence on a spiritual solution. And that really further opened the door for me in my spiritual development. I had dabbled before when I was drinking, but it was like my spiritual practices were in a bubble out here, and it never connected to how I lived my daily life. And what I do now is I focus on one spiritual principle a week, and I practice it in a variety of ways. So for example, this week, my spiritual principle is honesty. And for me today, transactional honesty is not a problem. If a salesperson in a store gives me back too much change, like that's not a big deal to me to be able to say, wait, you gave me back a 5 when you only owed me a 1. Where honesty gets interesting to me today is, where am I lying to myself? Where am I justifying things that aren't quite right in my behavior or my attitudes? Um, where am I justifying things that I really could be doing or thinking about differently? And that's where it gets interesting.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I have said several times, and on my own journey, just internally in my own inner work and rewiring and mindset, and really observing habits and behaviors and why I do what I do, I have always said that I was like, actually, the hardest person to get honest with has always been myself, because when we begin to look at ourselves, we see that how we were kind of denying ourselves, fooling ourselves in, doesn't matter the situation. It can be any kinds of situations. When we really get honest with ourselves, we can see the truth and we're like, oh God, you know? But again, that's part of the journey. It's not about then getting extra hard on ourselves. And we have this insight and realization. It's to change it and feel more empowered and be like, all right, okay, I can do something with this. So that's really interesting. And, why do you think people drink in the first place?
Oh gosh, I am not an expert on that part. I really am not. There are so many, I've read so many books about this, and it seems to be an amalgam of adverse childhood experiences, biology, environment. I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, and that's all right. And the part where you mentioned as well the spiritual practice and having a spiritual solution as well to, or making it part of your daily life as well, and not connecting it to that. I know you talk about as well some 5 spiritual laws that can help beat addictions, and maybe you've touched on some of them, but what are they as well?
So, the 5 spiritual laws are the solution for not developing that edge to start with, right? We talked before about different ways to not to take the edge off that don't involve alcohol, but the key to long-term happy sobriety or being alcohol free is really, the trick is, don't develop the edge to start with. And then the question becomes, well, how in the world do you do that? Right. And so, Karen, the way that I think about this is, imagine that all of us are walking through the world with fish bowls over our heads, kind of like those old scuba diving helmets, but you can see through it. And you can see the tree right
Mm.
outside your fishbowl. But fishbowls tend to reflect back, right? They're glass, so they
Yeah.
reflect your own image superimposed on top of that tree. And so there's not just that living thing out there, but there's the labeled tree or pine tree or ponderosa pine tree. And then there's all the judgments about, oh, that looks sticky, or God, what a mess, or I used to climb a tree, or it's good, or it's bad, or it's, it
Yeah.
shouldn't be this, or it shouldn't, like all of
Yeah.
that stuff we layer on top of
Mhm.
whatever it is we're looking at or interacting with. And so think, if you do all that with a tree, imagine what you do with the people in your life, right? So it's all these judgments about they should be doing this and that wasn't right. And I mean, it is exponential. And then you think about all the slang words for getting drunk: hammered, annihilated, destroyed, And I think it's because it gives us some relief from all of those judgments and all of that ego, which is what the fishbowl is, right? That keeps us so trapped in these perceptions and these self delusions and this preoccupation with ourselves. And so, if we want to be happily alcohol free, we need to find other ways besides alcohol to get outside that fishbowl. And so that's why these 5 spiritual laws are so important. Um, so, what I mean by a spiritual law is kind of like physics, but in the spiritual dimension, right? Like we can't see gravity, but if you drop this glass of water, it's going to fall to the floor and splatter all over. I have found the same thing to be true with these spiritual laws. You can't see them, but I've seen them at work in my own life and in so many other people's lives as they are becoming happily alcohol free, right? So the first one really has to do with the power of our subconscious, our imagination, our visualization, and our divine creative power. And if I stayed in that same life that I was in when I was drinking, I think it would have been really hard for me to be happily alcohol free. I mean, why get sober if you're going to live in the same sucky life, right? Like,
Totally.
you drop the anchor, you might as well have a big, juicy, magnificent, connected, meaningful, purpose
Mhm.
driven, laughter filled, adventure filled life. And so the first law really is about envisioning us being in our true place. And where is that? And how do we find it? And how do we be in it? There's a religious leader whose name is Frederick Buechner, who just died, who talks about our true place, our calling is where our greatest gifts meet the world's deepest need. And so, in this spiritual law, it is that there is a true place for every single one of us. And somewhere in our subconscious and in our DNA, we can visualize and know what that is. So, that's really the first spiritual law, is about our divine creative abilities and learning how to direct those. I mean, you created the life you're
Love
living right
that.
now. I created the life I'm
Yeah.
living right now. When I was drinking, I created that life.
Mhm. Yeah.
We always create our lives. We
Yes.
might as well do it with the power of our divine creativity turned on.
Yes. Love that.
I do too. It's so hopeful.
Totally. But I say that as well to every client. I'm like, we are creators. We don't need to learn how to create. We are creating 24/7. But like that, we're just not
Mm.
very intentional about it. Or we're creating from, these limitations, these subconscious beliefs, these difficulties, these adversities we went through, and we're still creating from them. So again, it can seem hopeless going, oh my God, well, why would I create all the quote unquote crap or continue creating it? But I also flip it as well. I'm like, no, take it as evidence. Go, if I can create that and create all the crappiness, that also means I can create intentionally and create what I do want. And that's the empowerment piece as well.
Standing ovation over here. Karen, I think one of the reasons why this is particularly cogent for people that have problems with alcohol is because even though our drinking lives are this spiral of being drunk, bad consequences, shame, needing the relief of a drink, getting drunk, like over and over again. When I was in that, and when most women are in that, we think that a life without drinking is going to be horrid.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this message of, oh my gosh, the sky's the limit, drop that anchor and oh my gosh, we can create whatever our hearts desire and we can experiment with what our heart desires.
Totally.
That's why this particular spiritual law is the first one that I talk about.
Mm.
So, the second law is the law of substitution. So, when we take alcohol away, there's a vacuum. And as Aristotle said, nature abhors a vacuum. Something's going to come in. And what you said before is exactly right. It could be sugar, it could be sex, it could be gambling, it could be overspending, it could be a variety of things, believe me.
Again,
I've
limitless.
seen it all happen.
Yeah.
um, but this law really goes a level beyond the, gosh, what am I going to do with my time? This one
Mm.
goes to, what are the old stories that have run me from the past? And what is the spiritual principle that is the antidote? So, for example, what I see in myself and have seen in the women that I've worked with is my foundational belief is somehow there is something not good enough about me. Somehow I am wrong on an existential level. I'm
Mm.
either too big or too small. I'm either too much or not enough. I'm not sexy enough, pretty enough, smart enough, successful enough, impressive enough, whatever.
Mm.
And then quickly on the other side, it's you're too loud, you're too bright, you're too, demanding, which doesn't leave you a whole lot of comfortable wiggle room in the
No.
middle. And what I mean by spiritual principles to substitute, it's things that are pretty anodyne. It's honesty, it's compassion, it's hope, it's acceptance, it's courage, it's vigilance. Like they're pretty anodyne principles, right? And what I find for this I'm not good enough insidious lie that we women tend to tell ourselves is to substitute service, to substitute, because then I'm thinking about you. I'm not so preoccupied with me. Nature is another really great one. That's an antidote to the self preoccupation. And I find that music and humor, like all of those kinds of things that lift us out of ourselves, are a great antidote. Because when I tell myself, oh, honey, you really are enough, my bullshit detector goes off,
Yeah.
It's like, I don't believe that.
Yeah.
So there has to be a spiritual principle to substitute in as an antidote. The third spiritual law is actions first, feelings follow.
Mm.
If we wait until our feelings about something change before we take new actions, we're going to be waiting for a long time,
Yeah.
right? And it's having just a smidge of willingness to pray in the morning, to slide out of bed and hit your knees and to the universe just ask for some help. All of my resistance comes up and I say, that's ridiculous. That's not what I was trained to do as a kid. People who do that are losers. I'm embarrassed. I don't want anybody to see me. Whatever all that resistance is. And it's like, yeah, I'm just going to do this as an experiment for 30 days and see what happens.
Yeah.
Right. So this is about actions first, feelings follow, taking the action, doing it as an experiment for 30 days, and then seeing what happens. The fourth spiritual law is forgiveness. And this is a really meaty, deep subject, but on its surface, what I want to say is that we don't forgive to let the other person off the hook, nor do we forgive to condone what they've done.
Mm.
We forgive to get some relief ourselves,
Yeah.
right? Because I can be carrying around, and in fact, when I first went alcohol free, I was so angry at my ex husband, even though we'd been divorced for 10 years.
Mm.
And so resentful and so hurt and blaming him, and I was a victim. And then through some careful self examination, I realized that I had been complicit in encouraging that relationship from the get go, even though I knew that there were red flags and it was inappropriate. And once I realized that and I formally owned my part of it to him and I changed my behavior towards him, oh my God, the
Mm.
relief that I felt.
Yeah,
He still has his stuff with me, and we've been divorced for 31 years. But I'm neutral with him.
yeah,
And gosh, what a gift, right?
totally,
So freeing. And
totally.
then the last spiritual law is really the power of connection. That I believe that God is love. And if the God word throws you off, I think that love is divine. And that connection, when one open heart meets another open heart, that to me is an experience of the divine. And what I've found, Karen, is that I cannot access divine with my rational mind. I can't get there from inside the fishbowl. I
No.
can't figure God out.
Yeah.
I can only open myself to experiencing God, divine, the universe, whatever your Allah, whatever your name is for that ineffable but real power in the world, is when my open heart meets your open heart. That to me is the experience of the divine. And so the fifth spiritual law is connection.
Mm. Wow. I absolutely love those. I mean, they're something that we can all take, addictions or no addictions, but we all have addictions of one form or another, even if they're seemingly quote unquote positive, if they're an excess, whether it's work, whether it's exercise. Again, we are, because again, I always say we're very clever. Like we're all meeting needs, whether we're meeting them positive, negative, or neutral. So I don't judge anyone. I'm like, everything is a medicine, no matter what you turn to in the moment. It gives benefit, it supports you, and sometimes it supports people in life or death situations. So there is nothing wrong with it per se, but then our medicine becomes our poison. Because when it's time
Mm.
to do our inner work, to look at ourselves, again, we haven't been taught this. Unless you've been on an inner curious journey, you're not taught this in life in general. So it's like, we don't know what to do. So we just keep going, or we keep running, we keep avoiding, we keep suppressing because we
Mm.
literally don't know. Well, in my case, I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know how to healthily release what was held within. So, it's like there's no judgment, but there is a way. And if we don't be accountable for ourselves or want to do it for ourselves, nobody can do it for us either. And those, yeah, spiritual principles I absolutely love and adore because they're the absolute truth at the end of everything. And
Karen,
yeah.
when at the beginning, when I said that my addiction was a gift that I didn't want to give myself,
Mhm.
well, the gift of it is I was going to live a life that was abhorrent to me, or literally, I was going to die. I was going to go home with the wrong guy. I was going to wrap a car around a tree. I mean, I've seen
Mm.
192 ways people can die of an addiction. And the gift is, it was a metaphorical gun to my head. And I had to create and experience a spiritual solution or else.
Yeah.
And so when I get up on my high horse about everyone should
Mm.
be, the truth of the matter is, I was drawn to spirituality. I
Mhm.
mean, I did Zen Buddhism, I did Siddha yoga. Seemed like anything that was weird and involved chanting in Sanskrit, I was attracted to. But it didn't change my life. And one of the things that's so important, I think, for women that are doing juice cleanses and going to yoga and reading Brene Brown and loving Oprah, all that stuff is great. And if you're not giving up alcohol, if it's a problem for you, that stuff isn't going to stick. And so the gift of my addiction is the spiritual experiences that I've had and had to have just transformed my life in such a magnificent way.
Mm. Yeah. That's beautiful. And again, so many people that I've connected with as well have gone through all sorts of different things. And we view them as horrendous. And it's not that they were easy, they were extremely difficult at the time, but they can look back with the perspective of what a gift it was as well, because they kind of took the ball and ran with it. They really made new decisions. They fundamentally went inside and changed themselves. So, and I believe that's, we're all looking for relief from ourselves in one way or another. I think until we're not, but I think it comes from a deep disconnection from the truth of ourselves. And
Mhm.
that's my belief anyway. When we are truly disconnected from the core of ourselves, we will look for things to make us feel quote unquote whole, but nothing is long lasting and nothing works except ourselves. We are the only person and thing and energy that can fill that hole within us. And then we are whole and we can see things from a different perspective as well. And, like that thing about dabbling in spirituality, that was me as well. It was like my secret, that I read all the books. I thought having the information and knowing it was enough, but action is the only antidote. It's the only way, and making it who I am and not something I do every now and again completely shifts everything. Because I thought it was enough just, having my little secret practice or reading the books, like you say, and it does on some level. But if we're not living it, if we don't have a practice, it's actually useless. Because again, for me, it was fundamentally going within, changing my thinking in the first place, observing and looking at what I held within me subconsciously that was causing me to turn to all these different things. And I think, just a question before we finish as well, when you mentioned, or when you made that decision and you found the camaraderie and connection with others who were alcohol free, and you went to that spiritual solution, how, as well, or is there any tips you can give people? Because yes, it's great having others who are like-minded and who are alcohol free as well, and being able to engage in those kind of events where there is no temptation. But are there any practical tips or tools as well for, if there's a family engagement or some social event with people you do know and people you do like, but you don't want to drink at those occasions?
The scariest question that I was anticipating when I first got sober was, why aren't you drinking?
Mm.
I think that is the fear of every single person that has ever given up alcohol. And in 23 years, I think I've been asked that 3 times,
Oh, wow.
and usually by somebody who's got a drinking issue themselves.
Mm.
So, first, what I want to say is, chances are nobody's going to ask you because nobody really cares what you're
Mm.
drinking. What I find is if someone says, would you like a drink? I'll say no. I'll say no, thank you. Or I'll say, oh, yeah, can I get a sparkling water with a lime?
Mm.
And then if they follow up and say, oh, don't you want a glass of wine? Or can't you have just one or whatever? My favorite line, Karen,
Mm.
is, oh, when I drink, my clothes fall off.
I love it.
Or I say, oh, no, thanks, not tonight. Like, I
Mhm.
don't have to go into oh, I had problems. If someone insists, what I have come to is a simple statement, which is, I had a problem with alcohol when I was younger, so now I don't drink. Period.
Yeah.
I don't need to go into my drunkalogue, nor do I need to expound on the evils of alcohol.
Yeah.
Uh, those simple statements, and sometimes done a little bit cheekily with a sense of humor, give a ton of relief.
Brilliant. I love that as well, because I think it probably is a big fear that people, again, we overthink things like, what am I going to say? How am I going to explain it? And yeah, just having some simple things. And I love throwing random statements at people, because it kind of, throws them off, and they're a bit flabbergasted. They're like, what? And they're like, oh, all right. Okay. They just
Don't
move.
want to know any more about
Yeah,
that.
that is fantastic. What a brilliant conversation. I think there's so much in it for people to take from. And just as a last question as well, what have you seen? Because now I feel it's so much more accepted that people don't drink. It's so much more common. What are the differences that you have seen from when you stopped 23 years ago to now?
Oh, the whole emergence of the sober curious nomenclature, movement, and availability of non-alcoholic drinks, mocktails, sober bars, non-alcoholic wine. Like who ever heard of such a
I
thing?
know.
So it really is a different vibe. I think that, I mean, I'm old enough that when I started my corporate career, the guys I worked for, and they were guys, had alcohol stuffed in their desk drawers. Like, I mean, it was not Mad Men. I'm not that old, but it was like people went out to lunch and drank. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just not the way it is anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm really, really grateful that people like Adele and Jennifer Garner now, like a lot of celebrity women are talking about their alcohol free status. Robert Downey Jr. Like when I got sober, it was masked in shame.
Mm.
And that's one of the reasons why 12 step programs I think are especially tough for women is, I mean, the Christian underpinnings can be a hard hurdle to get over,
Mm.
but that self-blame and the shaming element isn't helpful when you already think that you suck. You know what I
No.
mean? It only makes the problem worse. It is not an antidote.
Yeah. Well, amazing. Incredible. Lots of wisdom shared. And not to go into the shame or that, but it is easier nowadays than going back even 20 years. So if it is something someone's feeling called to, they should definitely explore it, and that bigger spiritual connection as well, and filling ourselves so we don't feel those urges is so important as well. So Kay, it's been an absolutely incredible conversation, and please, before you go, share where people can find out more about your work as well in your community if they want to connect and join.
So, the best way to get started is to sign up for the 7-day Stop the Drinking Spiral Challenge. And if you go to bit.ly, bit.ly/juicy Karen, bit.ly/juicy Karen, you'll have a sign up page waiting for you, and it's free. It's 7 days to help you get over that hump of taking the edge off without drinking. You can also find me at juicyaf.life, and those are the best ways to find me.
Amazing. And as always, I will have the links as well directly to your work and to that free 7-day challenge for people as well on the show notes on my website. And Kay, thank you so much for your inspiring and empowering conversation today.
Thanks so much, Karen. This was a blast.
Thanks for listening. And before you go, I would love to ask you a massive favor. If you enjoyed this episode or any episode of the podcast, I would love for you to leave a short review on Apple Podcasts to help it grow. If you could do that, I would greatly appreciate it.